Hi, everyone, and welcome to your Ignite session today. Everyone had lunch? After lunch? Do we need to do some yoga, wake up a little bit? No? Hi, I'm Raushni Gupta. I'm the Senior Director of Product Marketing at Azure. Joining me today are product leaders Bob Ward and Gopal Shankar. As we all know, generative AI is moving from being experimental to essential. And today, we'll be exploring the AI journey. And Bob will hit it where the rubber meets the road. He's going to build a RAG app from ground to cloud with no code, and he's going to show us how to do it. And Gopal is going to take us through how do you actually secure it through the stack. But my favorite part, and I don't have anything against Bob and Gopal, they're great colleagues, sorry, is hearing from customers and partners like you all. And today, we are delighted to welcome a highly distinguished thought leader and an AI innovator in the energy industry, Damien Bunyan. He's the CIO of 𝗦𝗽𝗲𝗸𝗀, and we'll have a conversation with him on his journey to scale to AI. So let's dive right in. So we talked about the AI journey. According to Gartner, greater than 90% enterprises are today on the path to AI. But what is this AI journey? And before we actually get there, let's see a show of hands. How many of you here are exploring your AI journey? Somewhere there. Hands. I'll put both my hands up. Most of us, right? So this is pretty much what Gartner showed us. 90% of us are in the journey to get to AI. And what is that journey, really? And we've got a little graph here. For most enterprises, it starts with identifying your AI ambition. And what is that AI ambition? It could be enhancing your user experience, customer retention, business operations, employee productivity, whatever that is. Once you identify your AI ambition, it's followed by making a build versus buy choice, whether you use an existing LLM or build one. For most customers, it's using an existing LLM and fine-tuning, testing, training to your data. But the journey really, as most of us would agree, is getting to the top right. It's the journey from piloting to production. Well, easier said than done, as you have told us. There are several challenges that our customers have told us they face. The first is there's a plethora of models to choose from. Where do you start? Which do you choose? That's the first thing that you have to nail as far as your AI journey is concerned. And then, as our friend Damien says, it's the data where the magic happens. So how do you get your curated and siloed data to a place where you can actually work with it to build your AI applications? Infrastructure considerations, power, cost, performance, is top of mind, of course. And as is security, governance, security is key. And of course, as always with any new technology, it's about inviting and retaining new talent and integrating it into your existing systems. At Microsoft, we believe that your journey starts with preparing a solid cloud foundation. And once you have a secure and solid cloud foundation, the next step is to co-locate your data from your silos and curating that data onto the cloud. Once you have that data in the cloud and have it close to your apps, your AI apps, it's easy to build, model, fine-tune, and get to inferencing where you want to land. And finally, of course, it's security. Microsoft is a pioneer in trustworthy and responsible AI. And we'll look at each one of these steps today, and we'll see some demos that help you give a practical insight of getting there. So, starting from the top, what does building and landing a secure cloud foundation look like? If you think about it, inferencing and operationalizing your AI is really the top of the pyramid. Below the pyramid, iceberg, whatever you choose to call it, lies a complex matrix structure of everything. Now, this slide is intentionally complex because under the surface, you have your infrastructure, like your GPUs, compute, and your storage, your databases, your security posture, CNAP, if you've ever heard about it, threat intelligence, SIM, workload protection, disaster recovery, the list goes on. And of course, monitoring, management, networking, just to name a few. And of course, with over 100 different vendors in your environment, it's about making them all work together. And that's just the first step of getting there. We've got good news. Azure is a single platform that provides you with a powerful, secure, and AI-ready foundation that you need to get your journey started. One of my favorite quotes that one of our customers told us is that AI is only as good as the data you use to model and train, the apps that you infuse into, and the infrastructure that you use to power your AI apps. Let's look at each one of these one at a time. For data, as I said, the first step is to put your curated and siloed data into the cloud. Once you've got it, it's like saying you're a chef and you've got all your ingredients in one place, and you can build that new recipe that you want to try. Imagine leaving something on the stove and running out to the store to get that essential ingredient that has to be imported from Timbuktu. I'm not exaggerating. That's how it is. You need to get your data in one place, make sure it works together to build and fine-tune and ensure that you're getting to the next step. And of course, for AI, whether you choose to, like I said, there's a plethora of models. With Azure, whether you choose to build it or use an existing LLM, Azure supports a wide set of choices, whether it's OpenAI, Mistral, Meta, or even Microsoft. For infrastructure, Microsoft provides a purpose-built infrastructure. In fact, a recent MLPerf study said that with Azure, you can gain 5x the performance and training, performance and inferencing that you could get with other providers. And where does that lead you? It gets you past that point of building, training, testing, reinforcing with human feedback to a point of inferencing and operationalizing your AI where you can land your AI ambitions, which is where your end goal is. I talked about co-location, and somebody just asked me, what does it mean to co-locate, and why should you co-locate? So we did a bit of a study on this, and I am hoping Damien can talk more about this. But if you look at this slide, we shared 3 stats. A Forrester study showed that greater than 75% of our enterprises said that it was far easier to innovate and be able to innovate when your workloads were in the cloud and you were working on your AI apps at that point. And also, they went as far as to say that it was essential to have your workloads in the cloud to innovate with AI. And we've got a very nice quote from one of our customers, a large manufacturing customer, who kind of puts it exactly like we're saying here. And I'm just going to read the last 2 lines here because it's so cool. The access to resources has helped us to significantly speed up and build and make it a much simpler and easier process. And resources is your data. It's your people. It's your ambition that you want to get access to and put it all together. Does that make sense? Yeah? So we talked about building a secure foundation. Next, we talked about co-locating your data to get up to 5x the inferencing and the training and the performance that you can get. And finally, it's about security. How many of you are familiar with Microsoft Defender for cloud here? Wow, love it. Anyone actually using it in production? Right? So it's a single platform. Anyone familiar with CNAPP 2, Cloud Native Application Protection? Yeah? It's a single platform that allows you an end-to-end ability to protect your AI stack with continuous risk and posture assessment. And that's across the stack, whether it's your infrastructure, your database, your apps, your networking, to your generative AI solutions, and all of this across a multi-cloud environment, whether it's AWS or GCP. Because that's where our customers are today, where you are today. And it isn't just about securing across the stack. It's about getting results. With Microsoft Defender for Cloud, you can get full visibility across your CI/CD pipelines and all your workloads. You can minimize your risk through your cloud security posture assessment and management, and reduce time to mitigate threats by up to 30%. Imagine that if any one of you here who sit in the SOC can think about it. Now, like I promised, we are going to be talking about, this was just an introduction of how we're approaching the AI journey. The next step in the AI journey is to see how do you actually build an app from scratch, from using no code, from code to, what is the term we use, from ground to cloud. It's about an end-to-end application. And to do that, I'd like to invite Bob Ward to show us how it's done. Hi, Bob.
Hey, thank you, Raushni. Appreciate it. Thank you very much. Awesome. Great to be here. So I'm Bob Ward. I'm a principal architect on the SQL team. I just celebrated my 31st year at Microsoft, all working on SQL technologies. Oh, thanks. By the way, if you're younger than that, I don't want to talk to you. I can't believe I'm here on stage talking about this. I can't believe after 31 years we'll be talking about AI technologies with SQL. I traveled over the last 8 to 9 months around the world talking about AI. I asked everybody that I've talked to, what do you think about AI? You know what they said? That chat GPT thing, that's pretty cool. I use it all the time. But I asked them, well, have you ever thought about building an AI app with your data? And they're like, why would I do such a thing? So let me show you an interesting journey about taking a legacy SQL server, migrating this to Azure, and then with no code, going and building a small AI application that you can like chat with your data, and doing all this in the space of Azure. So it starts with kind of this visualization. If I have my data, let's say in SQL Server, I can migrate that to say Azure SQL Database. Then I can build an Azure AI search index with that. Let's say on a particular table in my database. In this case, I'm going to show you a table called products, which has like descriptions of products, product names. I'd like customers to be able to shop for my products using natural language statements. So what do I do when I do this, build this search index? I pick the fields in my table, my data source. I build the index. But here's what's really cool. I can take Azure OpenAI and apply something called a skill to this, like generate vectors based on my data and put that in the index. And when you think about content safety, I can actually take another skill called PII and make sure no PII data exists in that index. So we're going to chat with it. Then I can easily go build a prompt application against that index, again, all with no code. So let's see how it works from kind of a end-to-end story. So first of all, let me start with Azure Migrate. I've got an Azure Migrate project, and I've got a SQL server, kind of a legacy SQL server, that it's assessed and detected. So one thing I love about Azure Migrate is I can kind of drill in to the SQL Server database itself and find out more details. In this particular case, this is an out-of-support database running SQL 2008 R2. So my goal is to migrate this into Azure. I go through that migration process in the Azure database, and I'm really set up for success. In fact, did you know as part of making that migration journey, I can use a Copilot. Doesn't everybody have a Copilot? We have one too. So I want to do this. I want to explore this data. I'm like, you know what? I'd like to see what kind of products I have. I'd like to see maybe a random list of products to kind of just generally look at it, but how do you write a SQL statement for a random list of products? Turns out I can go into Copilot and give it a natural language statement in the query editor to say, you know what, show me a random list of products. And it can turn out, it can generate a SQL query for me for that. So let me go click in here, hit generate query. It's pretty cool. It gives me a comment too about how it generated the SQL statement. Now, I've been doing SQL for a long time, so I knew how to do this, but I was so impressed by this. This is a technique that a lot of people don't know on how to use this new ID function to generate random lists of products. So here I am, not a T-SQL expert, exploring my data already with AI technologies because I'm in Azure. So what about this Azure Search Index? I've built the index. I want to show you what it kind of looks like behind the scenes. So here's my Azure AI Search service I've set up, and I've got an index behind it. Now, first I have a data source. That's my Azure SQL database with all my products in it. And let me show you what the index definition looks like after I built it. So I click in this index. The document count is the number of rows in the index itself for my table. And notice there's something called a vector index. You're going to see shortly that having that vector index is critical for my performance. As part of that indexing process with that skill set, I generate a field called embedding. I added that to the index. That wasn't in my source table. But it's got those key vectors in there. That's going to power this natural language chatting with my data. So we have something called an indexer. That's the process of actually taking the index and applying the skill sets and building them. And then here are the skill sets themselves, and one of those happens to be the connection to Azure OpenAI. I did all of this without writing any code. I just clicked some buttons, went to the portal, picked all my choices, clicked the index. Within about 10 minutes, it had come back and built my index for me. Now with Azure AI Search, I can actually do searching within the context of this portal, but I want to do this now with Azure AI Studio. So I'm going to go over here in Azure AI Studio, and I've set up a model deployment with the popular model GPT-4o, and I'm going to do something called the chat playground. I'm going to kind of play with, what is it like to chat with my data? So here's kind of the process. You first need to add your data. In this particular case, remember, not using SQL Server itself, we've migrated to Azure SQL Database. We're going to use the index. Another great thing is I'm not affecting my operational database here. I'm doing this all offline with Azure Search Index. That index is getting updated automatically, though, from changes from SQL Database. I'm going to pick the model I want, and then I'm going to go through and pick my fields. So I'll go here. Here feels like things I want to be part of the search experience. These kind of look familiar for like a product database. Here's a file name, which is an ID, and a title is going to be my product name. And then here is the important one. There's my embedding one. Well, why is that important? Because now I can do what's called a hybrid search. That's vector plus keyword searching across all that data. So when I do that, what do I do next? Well, I'm going to do a little prompt engineering. I'm going to go here, and I'm going to tell this chat playground, you behave like somebody helping shop for products. Make it very descriptive and lively. So once I give it that system prompt, I can go in and start chatting with something like this. There is no way you can run a SQL query to do a tight budget and easy to install. Only a natural language model can do that. So this behind the scenes is using that search index with my data to help a customer shop for and look at the results that come back. You know what? They're inexpensive. They make a living room appealing. Well, I had to check with my wife on that one, but yeah, it makes a living room appealing. Apparently these are products that actually fit with that model. I can see references there, but look at this now. I'm going to do what's called a multi-turn prompt. Are there inexpensive furniture options? I didn't have to repeat the first prompt. This is the beauty of talking to a language model. I'm doing all this with no code, but seeing what the experience is going to look like for my customers. Well, that's pretty cool, but can I go further? This is where it gets really powerful with AI models. So in this chat instructions, I'm going to change this. I'm going to say, don't change the data. Don't change the code. Go in and tell the model, why don't you behave like an AI assistant to help the marketing organization build ad campaigns? Notice I didn't change any code. I just changed this prompt. Now look what happens when I do this. I'm going to go into the chat window and say, go build me an advertisement for somebody who are on tight budgets for living rooms, appealing things that go in a living room. Notice how it comes back with a different set of instructions. Why? Because a language model understands what it means to build an advertisement. That's crazy. You can't build code on your own to actually make that happen. And I'm doing that all in the context of my data. Well, I'm using GPT-4o, and I thought I need to make this multi-language. So I'm like, hey, can you produce this in, say, I don't know, Spanish? So I'll say, hey, can you produce this in Spanish now? I'll come back. Comes back the results now. And look at this. Now I've got the results in Spanish. Again, no code needed to actually do that. So here I am just chatting with my data. I'm not affecting my Azure SQL database. I'm yet using an Azure Search Index to do all this work. This is pretty cool, but I need to go a little further on this. So I was asking and showing this to one of my colleagues, and it says, well, Bob, how are you going to build an app from this? Well, it turns out with Azure OpenAI Services, I can go in here and say, hey, I'd like to deploy this. Now look at these options here. A web app, a Teams app, or even a new Copilot Studio app. This is actually some code. If you were a developer, like a Python developer, you could pull this code fragment up and pull this directly into your web application. This is pretty powerful. Again, I've used no code to go build this entire solution, and I can change system prompts to go decide how I'd like to build the final AI application. So you're asking yourself, like, that's really cool. What does it actually look like? If I pick that web app option, look what shows up here. Now, I can customize this web app. You know what it does? It builds an Azure App Service behind the scenes. And you have customization options to go in and easily format what this website looks like, or deploy your own custom code to make the website more appealing, or even take just the sidebar chat option here and put that along a website. So once you do this, I can sit here and now go put in a question like this. This looks like my chat playground. So look what I've done. I started the beginning with a data source that I migrated from SQL Server into Azure SQL Database. I built an Azure Search Index to make sure I didn't affect my operational database offline from that, but with changes fed into it. I went into Azure AI Studio, quickly added that as a data source, played with my prompts, saw what kind of the behavior looks like, and then deployed that to an actual web application. That is truly the ability to build a RAG application ground to cloud pretty easily. So I'm really excited about that, and I'm asking myself, well, okay, well, is there anything else you can do in Azure that can really help me? So we have a new Copilot experience in Azure SQL Database, slightly different from that Copilot experience I showed you for query editing capabilities. Let's say in this case, my Azure SQL Database I'm using for that application, remember now the index is getting changes from that, and if that's getting changes from that, I need to make sure the app is running smoothly. Let's say the Azure SQL Database has performance problems. Because there are performance problems with that database, it's going to affect the ability for running the chat application properly, because again, it's using that index from changes from the database. So I was with the Copilot team in the SQL team even late last summer working on this project. And I've been, like I said, I've been doing SQL for a long time. And I asked the team, I said, so how are you going to approach this? And they said, well, how do you approach things? I'm like, what do you mean? Like, well, how do you solve performance problems? I'm like, do you really want to know that? Like, sure. We spent a period of meetings over several weeks talking about the approach for performance problems for SQL. Now, nobody ever talks to me in the SQL space and says, I know exactly what my problem is. What they do is they'll do something like this. So in Copilot, I can go in the context of my database. So you see the database in the portal here, and I can do a very descriptive problem like my database is slow. Very descriptive, right? But you know what, though? We've taught this Copilot using a language model what that means. You know what that means? Go check to see if there's a high CPU problem in your database. That is a very common performance problem. Sure enough, look at that. It's a high CPU problem. What does somebody do next when they're looking at these problems? They see, well, what query is affecting this problem? It has already pointed that out for me. And by the way, you know what happens when you have one of those issues? You might have a missing index. So it's already detected there's a missing index for that query. So within a matter of seconds, this has looked at my live problem, told me I have a performance issue, narrowed it down to the query that the problem is and the index of the problem is, and giving me best practices advices on what to do next. That is really hard to do. And even for experts, I've shown this in the SQL space, they're amazed at this. Because A, either experts are affirming what they want to go do with their databases, or B, if they're an accidental DBA or developer, they're getting expert advice and assistance from a Copilot to do this. We have some 55 different skills in Azure SQL Database Copilot that can actually help developers. So if you think about it now, to build that RAG app from ground to cloud with no code, I need to make sure I can have a Copilot with me to assist and ensure my source database that's feeding that app does not have performance issues, but if it does, how do I quickly resolve these? Pretty cool technologies. You can check it out at ak.ms SQL Copilot. Well, that's pretty cool to show you how to kind of do an example of something, but wouldn't it be really better if you actually talked to a customer who has been through this migration journey to Azure and is using AI services and has a really strategy around this? So now I'd like to invite Damien Runyon from Uniper to come on stage to tell us his story. Damien. How's it going?
I'm getting quite nervous. You're far more technical than I could possibly be.
Nervous. You have like a fan club down here, right? They're going to start doing the wave or something like that, right? So, no, Damien, I always love customers coming in here with us because it's one thing for Microsoft to talk about our strategy, to talk about these demos, but customers here in the audience may be in a journey like you are. So if I think about Uniper, one of the largest clean energy companies in Europe, you're the CIO for it. You know, if I think about what you're doing, your ambitions, North Star, what you're thinking about, migrating to Azure, just tell us a little bit about what that feels to you and like where are you guys headed?
Let me go maybe one step back and just explain this thing called Uniper. I don't need to talk about it as a business, you've done that, but we are essentially 8 years old. 8 years ago, we were carved out of a much larger organization. And that didn't feel very nice at the moment when the shareholders said, we're going to split you in two and you guys are going off in that direction. And the other bit of the company went off in another. But there was a great motivation at that point to prove a point that we could do what the old organization had been doing, but we could just do it much better. So we're 8 years old. And the old IT team smiled ruefully at us and said, well, you're going to have a few problems here, but we'll carry on supplying you with IT. And we said, no, we're going to do it ourselves. Yeah, but Damien, you're going to need to spend 3 years and $50 million building a data center. And we run critical infrastructure. Right? This is energy critical infrastructure. We said, no, we're going to go into the cloud. And I'm constantly surprised all the time. I've just come from the CIO summit here. How many CIOs are still worried about, should I go into the cloud? Which cloud? Is it secure? Is it cost effective? We went. Best decision we ever made was to go into the cloud. And not because you invited me, but the second best decision was to only go into one. And if you talk about North Star, my North Star was never AI. 8 years ago, I didn't know what that meant.
I don't think anybody did.
8 years ago, I didn't know what the phrase, I'd never heard the phrase data lake 8 years ago. For me, the North Star was, and I'd run infrastructure in our previous company, my North Star was resilience and robustness. I hated incidents. I wanted an estate that was well managed, run, where we didn't have problems. And only now do I realize that that's enabling us to have a different North Star, if you like, with AI. And back then, when we left the data center, we didn't know how many applications we had. So you're showing all this wonderful thing you can do with SQL databases, et cetera. But if you don't know what you've got, how on earth are you going to do it? How on earth is your data team going to curate everything if you don't know what you've got? And that move really, really helped us. The second thing it did for us, which was surprising, was in the moment that we said to the business, look, you need to help us with UAT at least once we do the move. A significant amount of time, this thing called the business said, oh, forget it. We don't need it. So we actually, in that moment, lost quite a lot of our estate, which means it got cleaned up, which meant it was easier to see what we had. So really, it was all around that thing called resilience. A few years moves on, and then you guys come to us and say, look, why don't we give you Microsoft 365, Office 365, whatever you want to call it, and we'll put it into the cloud. We'll put it into the same cloud where all my applications are sitting. Well, isn't this great? Because all my people live in a Microsoft world, and now when they're accessing their data, everything's in the same place. Then you give us Teams. That's a fabulous piece of technology. We live in a Teams world. And then things like Power BI come along, and now we're sitting in meetings where you're running a Power BI query in a hybrid meeting, but everything's all in one place, and you know where it is. So that gives us, and in a way I feel we were lucky, but we had a great set of people who were willing to take the curiosity and be brave. We end up with everything in one place, and that's a slight exaggeration, but we end up with most things in one place. And now you guys come along with something like Copilot, which for us, it just becomes a no-brainer. I don't need to talk about any other tool. It's obvious what tool we're going to do. It's just a question of whether we're going to convince the business to go and use it or not. And we thought for a while about going to the business and saying, with one of those typical PowerPoint presentations, that's one of the great tools Microsoft gives us all, one of these 3 options kind of thing where, small, medium, and large, where the answer's normally in the middle. And we said, no, we're just going to go and we're going to ask for the money to give it to everybody. Because, who are we to say who can use GenAI and who can't? And so we've gone all in. And it's allowing us to reset this thing that you call the North Star.
Do you think that, I've heard a lot of customers tell me about Copilot's a great example. I showed you a Copilot demo right there with Azure Database, but I've heard some friction from some companies concerned about that. Did you have some frictions from that process to do that, or how did you kind of convince your organization that's a great technology to help people?
When we went into this thing called the cloud, this thing that you call the business, and I hate that phrase because I think I'm in it as well. Okay. All right. But these people that I think you're referring to, they said we knew you were doing something in the garage, but we didn't know what you were doing. We were going into the cloud. We were going on to Office 365, and when the Corona thing hit, we kind of sat and thought, well, maybe we should test if we can work from home. It just worked. I mean, that's the moment where CIOs become semi-popular, or at least
semi-popular.
Heroes. And that builds a lot of trust. I've worked in other IT organizations where there's not necessarily that amount of trust. We've got that trust. And when we came along and said, we want to do this, we think it's the right thing to do, this is the price tag, at least the 4 people in our company who then take the decisions and pay out the money, they said, we want you to go.
That's awesome.
And it's also based around a little bit, because we do things in this way, we have a very good relationship with Microsoft. And so that builds, that helps us build momentum around it. So we're not having those debates. So again, I'm coming from the CIO forum, and there are lots of CIOs saying, I'm not so sure it's cost this amount of money. We're in, and I am astonished by some of the use cases. I even got some of my own. I would not want to live without that tool on my desktop anymore.
I mean, I'm a huge Copilot fan myself in my own organization at Microsoft. Tell me anything else about your AI ambitions that you're thinking about in terms of what Juniper's doing.
If I come back to your phrase, North Star, I don't want to leave the office in an evening thinking that there's another energy company in the world with a better basis. Yeah? I want my organization to have that. Now, to the extent to which we choose to use it, I can only go so far. But I see myself as the Chief Information Officer. So this is about making sure that this information, this data is democratized, it's available, it's easy to find. We've got new products that we're building, let's say around hydrogen, and if you want to start doing something with software around hydrogen, it's easy to find. We know where it all is. We need to curate it in a really great world, and we're a company full of engineers, then people can start using all of these tools. And while a lot of the other CIOs are a little bit hesitant, et cetera, we're going. Yeah? We went into the cloud, we got there, we succeeded, and now with this thing called GenAI, we're starting to ask questions to people like you at Microsoft, where the answer is, I'm not so sure. I'm not really sure I know the answer. Well, we'll work it out, and we'll get there. And I want Juniper to be regarded by organizations as Microsoft as being AI native, AI ready, AI advanced.
I like AI ready. I think I'm going to borrow that term. That's pretty good. So if you think, Damien, about data, you mentioned data a couple of times, and I'm a data guy, as you know. How important is that data? Like, AI solutions without good data seem to be bad AI solutions. How are you guys viewing that way?
Yeah, well, again, the majority of the people in this room will consider themselves IT professionals, I'm guessing. Yeah. So that's information technology. Right. Yeah. So we're using technology to manage the information. That's our job. It's our job to give our organizations the best information possible. And if that's not easy, fine. Right. Because other people can struggle, but we need to get there. And so for me, this decision that we took around resilience to go into the cloud, and you've just been talking about that, but only to go into one was, for me, just a great decision, because now we know where it is. I'm not sitting in a hybrid meeting with my power station manager who's got his SAP over here, but he's got his IoT data over there, and he's then trying to run maybe a Power BI tool or a Tableau tool or something else to try and link it all together. Now, let's get rid of the interfaces.
The co-location, I think that's what
if that's what you want to call it, maybe I'm being a little bit more negative. Get rid of the interfaces. It's the interfaces that make our life hell. Sure. In IT, and people worry about, you've got lots of different issues. Actually, I've got the resilience, I've got the robustness. I know where the information is. I do need to do some work to structure it, yeah. And that's the point where we start in IT using this word, the business. We then need to start talking to people and say, what do you want to do with this information? Because once we have that context, then we can curate it in a way that's then easy to get access to. And if I'm honest, we believe we've got 37 data domains. We think we've identified 37. Now, they're not all moving at the same speed. Sure. Yeah, but I've got enough work to do. Those that have kind of seen the light and know what they want to do, we're supporting those first, and then we bring the other people with us. And it's the same with IT. IT is a data domain. Well,
it's interesting that you've at least identified all the different data domains you have to go after. Yeah. So as we wrap up here, a lot of people in the audience, maybe kind of where you are, but probably not. I mean, you make some really bold bets here. How would you then give just advice if somebody wants to get started today in this journey? Like, what are some things that, as you did, what advice would you give them?
if I find my inner Texan, I listen to.
There you go, inner Texan. I like it.
Texan, there was somebody this morning said to me, "You can't do offense if you don't have your defense sorted." I see. And that's really the story. If I went back and did it all again, I don't think it would take 8 years, but we've been on an 8-year journey. You've got, if you don't know what applications you've got, you can't do big data.
You got to know what you have.
You've got to know what you have. And once you know what you've got, you can then think about what you don't have and how you're going to accumulate it and bring it all together. So it's really about knowing what you've got, making sure it's robust. But what's the point in doing AI with all these agents running around if your systems fall over all the time?
Right.
And that's just a nightmare. If these assistants start doing the work of 10 people, you've got a problem, suddenly you've got a 10-person problem. So it really is about having that basis, that solid foundation, and then working with your colleagues in the rest of the organization to say, if you want great data, you need to talk to me and tell me what it is you want to do with it. And then I'll let you have it. And then at that point, whether a power station engineer wants to use GenAI to do his or her work better, at some point, I've stretched to my complete limit as to what I can do. But that's the gift you give the business.
Awesome. It sounds like a very well thought but bold plan for Juniper. So, Damien, thanks so much for coming on stage today and telling your story.
You're welcome.
Thank you very much. Appreciate it. Thanks, Damien. So to wrap up today in our session, we've talked a lot about data, data. He talked about resiliency, but security is a concern. So we believe we've got all the right services and infrastructure in the cloud to help you make sure you have a secure solution for AI. So I'd like to bring up Gopal Shankar to talk about security with AI services. Gopal?
Thank you, Bob. Appreciate it. Good afternoon. My name is Gopal Shankar, and I am from the Microsoft Defender for Cloud engineering team. I'm going to talk about how can you actually secure and manage as well as govern your AI stack. Before I get into my slides and demo here, I want to know how many of you have been using MDC? Any? Okay, a few of you. I just want to set the context over here a little bit. Microsoft Defender for Cloud is our CNAPP solution, Cloud Native Application Protection Platform solution. It is made up of security measures and practices designed mainly for protecting the cloud applications. When building or migrating to cloud, it is important to start secure and stay secure. So that's where Microsoft Defender for Cloud comes. I think of MDC as three key pillars. First being that it unifies the DevOps management security so that you can get security at the code level and make sure that it is all aligned with how your organization would like to see it. And second would be how do you manage the posture of your environment to prevent any breach? And the third one is how can I actually protect my resources? What kind of protection can I enable on my environment? Those are the three things I would think of. So now I want to go into this demo here and show you how Defender for Cloud can actually help you, start secure and stay secure. So this is the console, our portal for MDC, as you see here. On the top, you can see the coverage across the different clouds that we have. Our solution is multi-cloud. And also, it tells you about the number of resources it has assessed, the attack paths and security alerts. And down in the middle here, you will see the security posture. Security posture is basically across all three clouds. You can actually go by cloud and see how well your resources are doing in terms of security. Also, it is giving the recommendation by risks. I'll come to it how it is doing that at the backside, but just want to give you an overview of that. As I scroll down here, you will see that it also provides you with the regulatory compliance. This basically helps you to align with any of the compliance needs that your organization may need, like the NIST or the PCI or anything of that kind. And then down, as we go, we can see that it is giving me an overview of all the workload protection, the coverage that I have in my environment, right? Right now, I can see that it is 98%. It also is going to give me alerts by severity based on the resources that I have. And last but not the least, the inventory. It is just telling me, what is being connected into my MDC and how is the health condition of all my resources. So it gives me a high-level overview of how things are in my estate. I want to go to the next slide here to show you about inventory. Let's double-click on this. So inventory, basically, the asset inventory, it leverages the Azure Resource Graph to pull the posture data to provide you with deep insights. So as you see here, as and when you onboard resources, you will start seeing this footprint, expanding. You can actually, filter by subscription, filter by resource type, or the resource group, or by environment to see exactly where the vulnerabilities are, how do I address these recommendations, and how can I improve the secure score that I just talked about in the previous slide. So here I'm actually filtering it by just Azure environment and GitHub, and it's just giving me a list of things here. I can see that there's a total count of 3.5K of resources. I can see some recommendations that are red and green, so I need to act on this. Next, I want to talk about secure score, security posture. So when I talk about security posture, I talk about secure score because it's going to give you, it's giving you the bird's eye view of like how is your security posture overall across all clouds, as well as separately individually for each of the clouds. These numbers will go up as you start fixing all the vulnerabilities and misconfiguration in your environment. And by default, when you enable Defender for Cloud in a subscription, it's going to use the Microsoft Cloud Security Benchmark standards to assess your environment. Based on that assessment, it's going to tell you what are the recommendations by risk that I just mentioned earlier. Again, once you get this, you can actually go here and filter by your environment to really understand what is going on in each of this environment, understand the secure score based on environment, and view those recommendations and actually act upon it. And since security is a team sport, we have also integrated this with the governance feature where you can actually assign this to a respective person, whoever owns the resource, can go and fix these vulnerabilities so that you can actually make sure that it is improving the overall score. Next, I want to get into recommendations here. So recommendations, again, a recommendation is it gives me a lot of options here. I can actually filter by the resource level or other factors that we have here and actually identify which one I actually want to focus on. In this case, for example, I want to focus on all the resources that is using AI for grounding so that I can actually go and see what kind of recommendations do I have that I need to fix. It gives me a clear picture of all the recommendations, and I can actually act on it based on the prioritization it is actually recommending. Next, I'm going to say, let me just switch to another resource here, which is the SQL. So I can actually filter by the SQL database and try to understand what kind of recommendations I have for this particular resource type. This gives me a view of what is happening in my SQL resource estate, and actually act on this as well. I'll click on the first one here to get a little bit more understanding on what this recommendation is talking about. For example, this one is saying that the public network access on the Azure SQL should be disabled. It gives me a lot of insights here. It gives me the risk factors. It's also telling me all the steps that I can take action to fix this. I can remediate it. I can actually delegate it. I can exempt it if I think I know it's a lab or something like that, or I can create a workflow automation. And also, I can prevent this in the future by actually enforcing this in the policy itself. Next, I want to talk about the new feature that we recently released. This is the attack path analysis. Attack path analysis provides you a visual context of the potential source and target impact. So based on that, you can actually prioritize how you want to actually fix this attack path issue that you're seeing. So for example, let me just go here and filter this by one of the Azure OpenAI attack path that I want to look at. It gives me a list of things here. So I look at the first one here. So it clearly tells me that this is an internet exposed Azure VM with high severity vulnerability, allows lateral movement to an Azure OpenAI resources. It gives me the description, it tells me the attack story, and I can also see all the resources involved and the risk factors, along with the intent. The graph tells me exactly how an attacker can actually come through the internet, have access to this virtual machine, can finally reach to my Azure OpenAI resource. If I want to know more about this particular virtual machine vulnerabilities, I click on it, I get deep insights. It tells me all the vulnerabilities that I have. It tells me what I need to do about it, so I can actually read through this and actually act on it. And I will basically, either fix the CVEs to reduce the risk, and or I can just go and make sure that I disable the access to internet so that this doesn't happen in the future. Now let's talk about security alerts. Security alerts are basically alerts that actually get triggered based on the protection plan that you enable. These are very specific to resources, and once you enable those plans, you will start seeing these alerts coming into the portal. So here, I want to show you one quick example that you can relate well since we're talking about AI. And this particular situation here, sorry, let me talk about this virtual machine that we just talked about in the previous example where, it could be vulnerable. So this one is a SQL injection that has come up in the console, so I can go and act on it. Again, it gives me all the details I need, and I can take action based on these recommendations. So I can also prevent this in the future by actually following what has been recommended here. That way, this does not show up again in the future. So let me show you one more example over here. And then I can do this for storage account and see what kind of an alert I'm getting. This one says there is a malicious file upload to an account, and I need to go fix this. So I can go back again here, look at all the details, understand, and I also see that there's a lot of sensitive data, and also see more information about this, so I understand this is a critical asset, and I need to go take action on this. Similar to what we saw in the previous slide, I can come back and prevent this in the future by putting it in the policy. So now let's just quickly change gears here. So I want to talk about this app here. Recently, we have launched the AI security posture management, also the AI threat protection for AI workloads, which is in public preview. So here is a user session that is going with Contoso Hotels, where as a malicious actor, I'm trying to jailbreak the app. When I do that, since it has actually been enabled with Azure OpenAI Content Safety Prompt Shield, it will automatically be blocked. Once it's blocked, I'm going to get, there you go. It's immediately blocked, and then I know that there is a jailbreak attack that's happening. So this leads me back into my portal in the MDC, where I can actually see this coming into, oops. There you go. So I can actually see my alert coming into my MDC portal. Again, I can filter this by the Azure OpenAI resources, and I can see that this is showing up quickly when this happened, and I can actually click on this. I get all the information about the alert, clean description, and what I need to do about it. Okay. So that basically gives me all the information that I'm looking for as a SOC analyst, so I can actually go and act on it. It tells me all the resources. It also gives me some evidence, supporting evidence as to why this has happened. I get full information that I need, so I can go and work on it. Here you see the prompt injection basically happening, which basically triggered the jailbreak attack. Okay. So as a resource owner, I can also go into my Azure resource portal to view if my resource has Microsoft Defender for Cloud enabled. If it is enabled, it's going to show me the alerts. Based on the alerts, again, I see the same recommendations over here, and I can go and act on this so that this doesn't come back in the future. So that is the end of my slides here. Just want to call out that I want to wrap up this session by saying that please take note of this AKA-MS site to learn more about the accelerated adoption. Also, we have a few more sessions on AI. Please do visit those as well and meet us at the booth if you have any questions.